At 50, I was worth over $1 million. At 65, I had 47,000 left. This is exactly how that happened. Not the version I told people at the time, not the version where the market turned and the timing was bad and circumstances beyond my control conspired against a man who had done everything right. That version is a lie. A comfortable, well-constructed, completely believable lie that I told for 15 years to anyone who asked and to myself every single morning for longer than that. The real version is simpler and uglier and entirely my fault. And I am going to tell it to you today because I am 84 years old and my heart is running at 38%. And I have run out of reasons to keep telling the comfortable version to people who deserve the truth. At 50 years old, I had a net worth of approximately $1.2 million. I want you to sit with that number for a moment. $1.2 million. I had a paid-off house, a thriving business, a retirement account that was finally growing the way I had always promised myself it would grow, investments that had performed well through the 90s, a salary that was the highest it had ever been. At 50 years old, I looked at those numbers and I felt for the first time in my adult life that I had genuinely arrived somewhere. At 65, I had $47,000 and a mortgage I had taken out at 62 to cover expenses I should never have had. $1.2 million to $47,000 in 15 years. I am going to tell you exactly how that happens, not in general, not as financial theory, specifically, step by step, the way it actually happened to Harold Voss between the ages of 50 and 65. Because I think some of you are at 50 right now, looking at numbers that feel like arrival. And I need you to understand what arrival actually looks like before you start spending like you have arrived. My name is Harold Voss. I am 84 years old. My heart is running at 38%. And I am angry. Not at the market, not at the economy, not at the specific sequence of events I am about to describe, at myself, for knowing better and doing it anyway, for being the man at 50 who looked at $1.2 million and thought that was enough of a cushion to start making decisions he had no business making. Before I go any further, I need to ask you something specific. At whatever age you are right now, do you know your actual net worth? Not your income, not what your house is worth on paper, not your retirement account balance, your actual net worth. Assets minus liabilities, the real number. Write it in the comments as a range. Under 500,000, over $1 million, somewhere in between, negative, just the range, no judgment. I want you to look at it honestly before you hear what I am about to tell you. Step 1 of how I went from $1.2 million to $47,000. I started making decisions based on how wealthy I felt rather than how wealthy I was. At 50, I felt wealthy. The number said wealthy. The house said wealthy. The business said wealthy. The car said wealthy. The restaurant when clients came to town said wealthy. Feeling wealthy is the most dangerous financial condition a man can be in, because feeling wealthy produces wealthy man decisions, and wealthy man decisions cost wealthy man money. In 2002, I invested $340,000 in a commercial property development that a colleague presented to me over dinner as a generational opportunity. He used those exact words, generational opportunity. I had never invested in commercial property before. I did not fully understand the structure of the deal. I asked questions that sounded intelligent and received answers that sounded reassuring, and I wrote a check for $340,000 because I felt wealthy enough to take the risk, and because saying no would have felt like admitting I was not as wealthy as I felt. The development stalled in 2004. The developer ran out of capital. The project went into receivership in 2006. I recovered $11,000 of the $340,000. $11,000. That is step 1. Not a market crash. Not bad luck. A wealthy man decision made by a man who felt wealthy and confused that feeling with judgment. Step 2. I refinanced the house in 2003. The house was paid off at 50, completely, no mortgage. An asset I owned outright that required nothing from me each month except the running costs. In 2003, I took out a $400,000 mortgage against it, not because I needed to, because the interest rates were low and the financial advisor I was paying significant fees to told me that leaving that much equity sitting in a house was inefficient use of capital and that I should leverage it into higher returning investments. He used the word leverage the way financial advisors use it when they want you to do something that benefits them. I took out the mortgage. I invested the $400,000 into a portfolio he managed. The portfolio lost 30% of its value in 2008. The mortgage remained. At 62, I was paying a mortgage on a house I had owned outright at 50, and the investments that mortgage had funded were worth less than half of what I had borrowed to buy them. That is step 2. Paid off house at 50, mortgage at 62. Because a man who felt wealthy listened to someone whose income depended on him feeling wealthy enough to act. Step 3. I lent money to people I cared about. Not strangers, not bad investments, people I loved. David needed capital for a business venture in 2005. I gave him $80,000. Not lent, gave. Because I felt wealthy enough to give it and because watching my son struggle when I had the means to help felt unconscionable. The business venture did not work out. A close friend of 30 years had a medical crisis in 2007 that his insurance did not fully cover. I gave him $60,000. Again, not lent. Gave. He died in 2009. The money died with him. My sister needed help with her mortgage in 2008. $40,000. She paid back 20 of it over the following years. The other 20 she could not manage and I never asked for. $180,000 over 3 years to people I loved. Not $1 of which I regret in human terms. Every dollar of which contributed to the arithmetic that ended at $47,000. That is step 3. Generosity funded by a feeling of wealth rather than an honest accounting of sustainability. Step 4. The business stopped performing and I did not respond fast enough. In 2006, the business began losing its largest clients. Not dramatically, one by one, over 18 months. I told myself it was a cycle, that it would recover, that I had been through difficult periods before and come out the other side, and this was no different. It was different. The industry was changing in ways I had not kept pace with. The clients were moving toward firms that offered capabilities I had not built. The relationships that had sustained the business for 30 years were retiring along with the generation of men who had built them. I needed to restructure fundamentally in 2006. Instead, I maintained. I kept paying staff I could not afford to pay. I kept the office I could not afford to keep. I kept presenting a surface of stability to clients and colleagues and Margaret, while the actual numbers told a story of a business that was slowly running out of road. By 2009, the business was generating enough to cover its own costs and almost nothing else. By 2011, I closed it. The thing I had spent 30 years building ended not with a dramatic collapse, but with a quiet Tuesday morning when I locked the office door for the last time and drove home and told Margaret it was done. She already knew. She had known for 2 years. I had told her everything was fine. That is step 4. A man who had survived difficulty before mistaking familiarity with a problem for the ability to solve it. Maintaining when restructuring was required. Protecting a surface when the foundation needed rebuilding. Step 5. And this is the one I want you to hear most carefully. I never adjusted my lifestyle to match what was actually happening. Throughout all of it. The property investment loss, the mortgage, the money given to family, the business declining. I kept living like the man who had $1.2 million, not entirely, not recklessly, but enough. The holidays continued, smaller than before, but they continued. The car was replaced when it needed replacing rather than driven until it did not. The restaurant, when clients came to town, continued because stopping felt like admitting something I was not ready to admit. I adjusted at the margins while the center was collapsing. And by the time I adjusted at the center, there was almost nothing left to protect. At 65, I sat down and did the arithmetic properly for the first time in 15 years. Not the Saturday morning numbers that told me what I wanted to hear. The real arithmetic, assets minus liabilities, $47,000. I sat at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and I wrote that number down and I looked at it for a long time. Margaret came and sat across from me. She did not ask what I was doing. She could see what I was doing. She said, "Harold, tell me what it says." I told her. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said something I have thought about every day since. She said, "All right. What do we need and what can we let go of? Not what happened, not how, not whose fault. What do we need and what can we let go of?" That question saved us, not financially. We were past the point where a question could save us financially. It saved us from spending the years we had left being angry at the years we could not get back. I am angry at those years today, so you do not have to be angry at yours. Here is the twist I promised you at the beginning. The thing that went wrong in every one of those 5 steps was not money. It was identity. At every decision point, I made the choice that matched who I believed I was, rather than the choice that matched what I actually had. I believed I was a wealthy man, so I made wealthy man decisions. I believed I was a generous man, so I gave money I could not sustainably give. I believed I was a capable man who had survived difficulty before, so I maintained when I should have restructured. I believed I was a man whose lifestyle reflected his success, so I protected the lifestyle when I should have protected the foundation. The money did not fail me. The identity failed the money. And the only way to have made different decisions at any of those 5 steps would have been to be willing to make decisions that did not match who I believed I was, to say I am not wealthy enough to take this risk, to say I am not in a position to give this money, to say this business is failing and I need to face that honestly, to say my lifestyle needs to shrink to match my reality. Each of those sentences required being a different kind of man than the man I had decided I was. I was not ready to be that man at 50, or at 55, or at 60, or at... I became that man at 65, sitting at a kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and a number that left me no other option. You do not have to wait for the number. You can choose to be that man today, before the number arrives, before the arithmetic does what arithmetic always eventually does. Leave me a comment. Tell me which of the 5 steps you recognized yourself in. Just the number. 1 through 5. I read every single one. And if someone you know is at 50 right now looking at numbers that feel like a rival, send this to him before he starts spending like he has arrived. I am not done yet.